Although McLaren took a commanding 1-2 finish at last Sunday's Hungarian Grand Prix, it is worth pointing out that Ferrari achieved the biggest step in performance compared to last year's Budapest F1 round. Assessing the improvements teams have achieved compared to last year's Hungarian Grand Prix, Ferrari stood out as the Scuderia have made huge inroads in terms of race pace. As seen from the lap times and the telemetry data, the Maranello-based team found 0.67 seconds per lap compared to the race pace it displayed last year. The SF-24 car was particularly strong in the hands of Charles Leclerc, who extended his opening stint in order to chase an aggressive offset strategy. The Monegasque delivered eye-catching lap times on Pirelli's hards during his second stint, but Ferrari made a mistake by calling him in early for his second stop. The early second stop meant that he could not extract everything from his relatively fresh hard tires, and was forced to complete 30 laps on the medium compound during his last stint. More crucially, he was stuck behind Lewis Hamilton, meaning he could not exploit the peak grip of his fresh mediums. Commenting on the Hungarian Grand Prix, Ferrari team principal Frédéric Vasseur said that while he was not completely happy with the 4th and 6th place, he was delighted with the progress the Scuderia has made compared to last year's Hungarian Grand Prix. The French manager emphasized the need to continue improving, clarifying that he was not satisfied with being 20 seconds behind someone, but noted that last year they were 65 seconds behind the race leader. McLaren found the second biggest step compared to last year in Hungary, with their race pace having been 0.59 seconds quicker than what they showed last year, while Red Bull endured the biggest shock at the Hungaroring. The Milton Keynes-based outfit was 0.21 seconds per lap slower than a year ago. It was a huge setback for Red Bull as Max Verstappen finished over half a minute in front of Lando Norris last year and almost lapped the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc, who finished ahead of the Dutchman this year. It's not yet time for rest following the Hungarian Grand Prix, as the focus now shifts to Belgium, the 14th round of the 2024 Formula One Championship. And unfortunately, the scenario looks very challenging for Ferrari. The Maranello team will have to try to optimize the setup of the SF-24 single-seater through a very difficult compromise. As we know, the operating window of the Ferrari car is very short, and the Spa-Francorchamps circuit is composed of very different sections. For this reason, it is always complicated to find a setup that can cover the entire track. One must therefore decide in which direction to go and which sections to focus on when trying to gain lap time based on the strong points and the weaknesses of the car. The lap begins with a slow downhill corner called source. This is followed by a long high-speed section, making the exit crucial. Traction must be maximized. Gaining on entry could be penalizing in the interpretation of the first sector. Ferrari is very strong on entry, but we have seen that it is also capable of optimizing the exit. Slow or medium-slow sections like this should not pose a major problem. The portion of the track that follows is driven flat out up to turn 5. In between, we find the famous Eau Rouge section, which in the qualifying session is tackled with the throttle fully open as the cars are very light on fuel. In this context, the suspension of an F1 car undergoes compression, and the floor lowers, minimizing ground clearance. Ferrari must limit bouncing to ensure this element does not become penalizing and consequently does not limit speed. The prancing horse must optimize this section and the last one, which are actually the fastest. Last year, the Italian team managed to find a good compromise by using a fairly unloaded wing, the version which was also used at the Baku City Circuit in the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. For 2024, a specific wing introduced at the Imola circuit with a low level of downforce will most likely be chosen. For the current characteristics of the car, it is advisable to maximize performance on the straights through a more unloaded setup. Cars like Red Bull and McLaren can instead focus on building the lap in the central sector. Indeed, several high-speed, wide-radius corners are located in this sector. Here, Ferrari will have to try to contain losses once again, somewhat like last week in Hungary. The SF-24 has an endemic lack of rear load, and although it manages to find a rather clean balance in these corners, it is not entirely effective. A bit of downforce might also be missing since the rear will tend to be unloaded, an aspect that could further highlight Ferrari's various limitations. Less downforce at the rear wants to be compensated by the push generated from the floor. The Maranello engineers, therefore, choose to stiffen the suspension elements, aiming to achieve the most stable aerodynamic platform possible by lowering the car. This move leads the entire F1 to work in an unfavorable configuration that limits the balance between fast and slow corners. A big problem. Ferrari thus shows a certain tendency to oversteer in the middle of the corner, while handling on high-speed curbs is not stable. The reduced floor-to-track surface distance can then trigger bouncing, whose negative effect must be contained. Overall, the lack of efficiency will be felt, as the Maranello technicians will not be able to load the rear wing much. This is why they will try to limit losses in the second sector. It should also be noted that, in general, ground clearance will be raised, an aspect that is not necessarily an advantage for Ferrari. Ferrari might indeed struggle even more to find load derived from the floor. At the 7.004-kilometer circuit de Spa-Francorchamps, we will understand if the recent update with the reshaping of the floor's kick will be effective or not. The updates have improved slow corners, but vertical load generation in fast corners is penalized. The Hungary version of the floor should guarantee more stable load and less sensitivity to height variations. The third sector is composed of a single straight leading to the track's final chicane. Ferrari can recover something in braking if it manages to maximize top speeds by avoiding clipping. The last chicane is very slow, where traction will be crucial. Looking at the weather conditions for the Belgian Grand Prix weekend, we can say that cooler temperatures might inhibit Ferrari's performance, because they normally tend to put less energy into the tire, struggling to maintain the correct working range. Precisely for this reason, on several occasions, we have seen an SF-24 weak in the opening sector of a lap that loses itself in preparing the compound on cooler track surface, consequently failing to access the correct grip throughout the lap. Charles Leclerc is bracing for Ferrari's weaknesses to be most visible in the Belgian Grand Prix next weekend, after paying the price in the Hungarian Grand Prix. The Italian side brought a floor update to the Hungaroring in a bid to try and undo the bouncing that has been reintroduced into the SF-24 after a Spanish Grand Prix aerodynamic update package that also come with various problems for the Maranello team. Reflecting on the overall performance in Hungary, Charles Leclerc acknowledged that they were still lacking significant qualifying pace compared to their main competitors, which impacted their results on tracks like the Hungaroring, where overtaking is very difficult. The Monegasque believed they had a strong car but felt they couldn't have achieved much more given their starting position. The qualifying pace, especially with Carlos Sainz, who did a very good lap, highlighted a gap, with the team being 4/10 behind and feeling there wasn't much more potential in the car. Charles Leclerc anticipated that Spa would be a real test, likely exposing their issues most visibly, but Ferrari planned to see if substantial work was needed to fix their problems and whether the upgrades from the weekend can help them make progress, in the hope of coming back stronger in the second half of the 2024 Formula One Championship.